But is this being done in the interests of the public? I think that's a huge question. And I worry that public interest should be the driving force, but it might not be unless planning agencies are also privy and work closely with technology providers. Today, technology providers are running away. Traditionally, the public interest was based on planning agencies, public agencies who would always look at some of these issues, look at things. I'll use the word, will corporate greed be the driving force as opposed to public interest?
Well, Chandra, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast to chat with me today.
Welcome. Pleasure, Emily.
Would you be able to give a little bit of an introduction about yourself? So your name, your title, the organization that you're kind of involved with, but also something that you are passionate about.
Yeah. So, my name is Chandra Bhat. I am the Joe King Endowed Chair Professor of Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. I have an appointment in the Civil, Architectural, and Environmental Engineering department here, but I also have an adjunct faculty position in the Department of Economics. What gets me excited? I like to do a whole lot of math. I like to come up with new statistical distributions, have fun with some of that. And, always I'm proud of my two daughters, one of whom is championing the cause of the environment here in the United States, especially at a time when I think it's dramatically, being, thrown under the bus.
What got you interested in this field? Because I don't think a lot of people think maths and then also think fun or exciting, but you seem really excited about it. So I'd be interested to know a little bit more about that.
When I was young, I was told that I'm good in English, I'm good in writing, and I suck in math. And I think that was true for quite a bit of time. And there was one teacher who really reshaped my thinking and talking about how one person can really completely change the trajectory of the way you think, instill passion. And I still remember this teacher's name. His name was Xavier. And I think he quite touched me. And that really got me interested in math. And then I kept moving along, did my undergraduate and was looking for graduate studies. And I did my undergraduate in civil engineering. I wasn't sure what transportation was at that time. The curriculum at the Indian Institute of Technology, Madras, as I think in many schools even today, was much more focused on structures, geotech, and transportation got a short shrift, I would say. For me, it was a process of elimination. So, I wasn't too thrilled about structures. Geotech was something that did fascinate me. And then you had this pre-stressed concrete, reinforced concrete. It just went over my head, so to say. When I came here for my master's to the United States, things picked up because I got more interested in transportation. In part, I do a whole lot of social sciences. I look at human behavior. I look at travel behavior. Psychology becomes extremely important. And I'll tell you, there's this notion that psychology and behavioral sciences are soft fields. Yes, they can be soft fields and they must be soft fields, but there's a whole lot of math involved in some of these modeling techniques. Still keeps me like a kid in the candy store. Transportation is sometimes referred to as an applied field. And I would say, no, not really. Some of the things that we have contributed has become so fundamental in statistics, in econometrics. So they are foundational contributions, not just application contributions. So overall, you can pretty much focus on anything about society. Transportation is the lifeblood of society. It's about quality of life, and that makes me passionate.
So you are based in the US, but you are also involved with the Institute of Transport and Logistics Studies, which is at the University of Sydney Business School here in Australia. How are you involved with ITLS? What do you think makes that school unique?
A lot of things make it unique. Let me start with the number one reason: David Henshaw. When I was a student, 15, 17 years is like a huge difference, right? In my dissertation, in a lot of my research, I have invoked his name. He's done some phenomenal work in economics, in logistics, in transportation. I would say we are very close friends. And I do know that we reference each other's work. I reference more than probably he does. And he'll just say, "Oh, Chandra, that's simply you're telling me I'm older than you." I mean, he's got his own way. I think that's where the relationship started. And then, you have many others today who are contributing in substantial ways. You're talking about Matthew Beck, you're talking about Michelle Bleemer, Michael Bell. I've known Michael Bell for a long time, at least by name. I think that ITLS is front and center in terms of multimodality. So it's not simply the surface transportation, road transportation, but port, marine transportation, aviation, and is big into urban logistics, supply chain management. I think these are critical considerations today, especially as we go into a landscape where technology is changing the way we live. I would say few institutes cover it as well as ITLS, if there is any that covers it as well.
You're right that David is quite the I don't even know what the figurehead. Maybe he's very well known. So we love David.
And I don't know how long this person is going to keep going on and on and on. Seems like I don't know. The last I think he said he is kind of retiring, but then he sends that, and in the same breath, 2 days later, he sends me a paper and says, "Chandra, I thought you might be interested in this."
I don't think he's going to retire anytime soon.
No pressure, David. No pressure.
No, yeah,
You
no,
can retire if you want.
yeah, no pressure. So you mentioned at the beginning, you've done a lot of work around how and why people make particular travel choices, particularly activity-based travel demand modeling. How do your models account for that complexity when it comes to human decision making in their travel choices? And why is it important to understand that and how it impacts travel behavior?
That's a good question. And I think that's partly also what got me interested in transportation. As I pull the leg of my very esteemed colleagues at UT Austin, I mean, these are people who are who's who in structures, in geotechnical engineering, in environment. But my way of pulling their leg is, at the end of the day, you folks look at how materials, how structures behave when put under stress and strains. What I do is I focus on how humans behave when put under stress and strains. And I tell them, you know, I'm sure that predicting how structures and materials behave is much easier than predicting how humans behave, simply because of the heterogeneity in people, the way we think, our mind processes are quite different. While, I'm sure my colleagues will beg to differ. A steel is a steel, it's going to behave the same way. And then they'll say, no, 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 you have different qualities of steel. There's a lot of heterogeneity. Yes. But I think, it is the challenge of understanding behavior. Some of my students, correctly so, I think, say, Dr. Bhat, for all the excitement you get from uncertainty, in people's behavior, you do not like to see like you do not seem to like uncertainty at all in your own planning. And I think they have a point there. I like to have a schedule, and if there's any deviation, I get a little upset, even on vacations. I'm sure my three girls, my two daughters, and my wife would rather go on vacations without me because they'll change their plans as a I'm like, no, 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 this is what we decided to do. So this is what. So it's interesting how I love to model uncertainty. That I think is an interesting aspect, and the heterogeneity among people, how different people think differently. Now, why is this important? I think in almost every aspect of transportation, every aspect of society, how we decide to travel is going to be important. So if we have a new high speed rail from here to, let's say, from Austin to Dallas, who's going to use it? Will the draw come from people who are driving today? Will the draw come from people who are flying today? Where is the congestion going to be reduced? Because it depends upon where from people are drawn into high speed rail. How many people will be drawn? Because that's important in the context of the fare box. How much am I going to get? Is this even feasible? And then you go extend it further. How do I design this? Should I have a restaurant car? If I have a restaurant car, is Emily going to be willing to jump on board the high speed rail more? But how much more is Emily willing to pay because there's a restaurant car? So the design aspects of transportation is also very thrilling. And then you bring in the psychology elements of things. So uh, I'll tell you this as an example, and you work quite a bit on connected vehicles, autonomous vehicles, self-driving cars. People say that those who have difficulty in driving, this will benefit them a whole lot. So who are these? People who are generally older, maybe 60, 65, 70, 75. They have difficulty driving, and so this can provide them new mobility technology so they can do what they want. On the surface, it seems very reasonable, right? I mean, these are the ones who find it difficult to get around. You know what? These are the ones, the older individuals are the ones who are most reluctant to take up self driving cars. Now, you can ask why that might be so. Now, maybe they're not that tech savvy. They were not born in the ubiquitous world of digital platforms, elements, etc. That could be a reason. But there's something else from a psychology standpoint, which is as we get older, and Emily, you have plenty of time for that, but I'm getting there. As we get older, our physical frailties start coming into the picture, obviously, and even mentally, there is a degradation of our cognitive abilities. But that's the time when we like to do what we were doing when we were young. It makes us feel empowered. It makes us feel young. So I want to continue having control of the wheel because that's what I have done all my life. Okay, I don't want to give up control of the wheel. So it's interesting how, on the one side, it seems so obvious. And even today, you'll see so many papers saying, oh, autonomous, connected, they'll be very helpful for the elderly, the older people. But these people are the ones who are most reluctant. So it's a very interesting conundrum. And how do we get out of it if we want to provide more mobility for the older individuals? So this now dovetails into why this is all important. Why is it important to model these kinds of things? And at the end of the day, it's an issue of the lifeblood of society. Now, by the way, one more anecdote I'll give you. It's issue of social exclusion and time poverty. I remember there was this old lady in Chicago when I was doing my PhD who used to keep calling 911 emergency constantly. And what the emergency responders figured out after many times is that she had mobility problems. She couldn't go outside her home. And this was her way of human contact.
Mm.
Bring humans to her door. How do you do it? Call 911. As humans, we're not very good if we are alone in solitary confinement. So, what I'm trying to say is that transportation is the means to have contact with people. If you want to go and sit in the plaza for people watching, you need to go to the plaza. You need to be able to make it there. So, transportation, I would say, is the backbone, is the lifeblood of society. And all of these things come together. It's a quality of life issue. And how people behave, how do we provide for them? This all is through modeling.
There's two things that I think you mentioned that were important, and that was the idea of equity, but also that autonomous and the connected part of that as well. So I'll start with the latter because I got a lot of questions. So trends like connected and autonomous vehicles are becoming more mainstream, as you've mentioned. And you've kind of touched on how you think travel might change or not change because of that or in reaction to that. So, how do you foresee travel behavior modeling evolving with these new technologies?
I personally think safety will benefit. In the United States, we still have 40,000 or close enough fatalities each year, which is humbling to us. It's been sticky all through for the past 2, 3, 4 decades. I am hopeful that that number will go down, but only when we have autonomous vehicles relatively on a massive scale on our roadways, which will take some time. Now, how will that change our travel? People have this notion that autonomous and connected vehicles will be the panacea, which it'll immediately alleviate traffic congestion on our roadways. I do not buy that. Now, why is it that they think it'll alleviate? Because right now, when we are traveling on the highways, traveling at 60, 65 miles per hour, we keep a distance from the car in front. And that is because of human perception reaction time. If I see the brake lights in the car ahead, it takes me a little bit time to recognize and decide to stop accelerating and start braking. And there's a delta of about 2, 2.5 seconds. Now, the idea is that with self-driving connected cars, you can almost think of it as a platoon. So you have vehicles going at 65, 70 miles per hour, and they all become literally like cars of a train, all moving with hardly any headway between each vehicle. And there is this potential immediately of increasing capacity. So imagine if you did not have a 2.5 second gap between vehicles, but it was simply like almost kissing each other, and you had this train going at 65 miles per hour. Immediately increases capacity. Why might this not completely alleviate traffic congestion? That's where travel behavior starts coming into the picture in my mind. So the first question is, will Emily be traveling more because she does not have to drive? So she might go places where she was not going earlier because she's relieved of driving. In fact, in a published work, we try to quantify in the context of today. That is, I'm sure in Australia too, you have what we call partially automated features. What are these partially automated features? You have lane keeping assistance, you have auto cruise control, you have rear view backup cameras, you have, all of these things. The idea was we were trying to see how much these improve safety. Yes, these do have the potential and do actually increase safety. But our question was, because of having these features, are people driving more? And as soon as people start driving more, you have more exposure, more vehicle miles of travel. typically means, in general, human driven, you're talking about partially automated features, you could have more crashes. So, some of the benefits of these partially automated features might be offset by human behavior. We saw this offsetting behavior in the context of airbags. In the context of these partially automated features, what we found is that typically in the United States, a vehicle will have a mileage of about 12,000 to 13,000 miles per year. That's the amount of miles put on the vehicle. But what we found is that if these vehicles now have these partially automated features, they seem to be driven about 2,000 to 3,000 miles more per year. So if we had these partially automated features increasing amount of travel, fully automated and connected vehicles will also increase our miles of travel. So how do we curb some of these tendencies so that while improving safety, we do not increase travel too much?
Another technology that's also treated as a bit of a panacea in my mind is AI. What do you think about the potentials or maybe even the pitfalls or the unintended consequences of using AI to influence or transform transport operations and planning?
It's a very good question. I think today you can't get away from the word AI, Gen AI, you know, and I think there's a place for them. I think they can make our jobs more efficient, but I think there should always be a human element to validate what AI is generating. And I think it goes back to the question of equity. Give you a simple example. Let's say that Gen AI and AI is trained, our cars are trained, our self-driving cars, autonomous, are trained based on how today's drivers behave. Now, in the United States, pedestrian fatalities have really ballooned. But what is also interesting and unfortunate is that black pedestrians are overrepresented in the pool of pedestrian fatalities. Big time.
Well,
I'll connect it to your question, so bear with me. There have been some studies conducted elsewhere by my colleagues which suggest that as motorists, we are much more likely to yield to a white pedestrian and give more cushion to a white pedestrian than to a black pedestrian. All of this driving data, how we drive, is fed into AI. What are these cars going to do? They're going to mimic the same thing. A lot of these things are being driven by technology providers. But is this being done in the interests of the public? I think that's a huge question. And I worry that public interest should be the driving force, but it might not be unless planning agencies are also privy and work closely with technology providers. Today, technology providers are running away. Traditionally, the public interest was based on planning agencies, public agencies who would always look at some of these issues, look at things. I'll use the word, will corporate greed be the driving force as opposed to public interest?
That is interesting. I haven't, that's a very clear way to phrase that as well if the interest of the public's still involved. My last question, this one was kind of my, not a red herring question, but just something that I thought of at the end that I thought might be really interesting because road pricing schemes are becoming a really big thing, particularly with electrification and just modal shift and a bunch of other different things that governments are trying to put in place. How do you think road pricing schemes like road user charging or congestion pricing intersect or will intersect with travel demand management strategies?
There is a fight right now with the current administration at the federal level and New York City.
Mm. Mm.
New York City implemented congestion pricing sometime in January.
Yeah.
And the Department of Transportation now is basically revoking support. In general, I subscribe to the view that the full externality of our transportation must be considered when pricing. I think that is appropriate. How much will pricing improve the situation? I think it has to be used as a tool, as one tool in the overall toolbox for travel demand management. It has a place. The important point, again, it comes to equity. People who are not able to pay up that amount of money to buy time. In some ways, you can think of pricing as nothing but using money to buy time. Some strata of the population are more able to do so. I think that's where it becomes much more trickier from an equity standpoint. So I think it should be and it can be used as one tool in the overall toolbox, but it has to be carefully considered, and there must be options for those who are unable to use these priced corridors. And it should not be at the total detriment of the people who are not able to pay up. And in some parts of the United States, including in Austin, you cannot convert a currently existing lane into a priced lane. If you want to implement a priced lane, you have to build another lane. You cannot take away one general purpose lane and make it priced, because that would have certainly implications and would have inequities. So I'm not giving you a straight answer. I think there's a place for pricing. I think it's important to try to get the full externality charged to each and every individual. But also, it has to be done in a very careful, very measured way so that it does not, have substantial disparities.
Well, I've definitely learnt a few things today. So, Chandra, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast to chat with me.
Hey, Emily, always a pleasure, and hats off for what you're doing.
To learn more about any of the guests that we have on the Bite Size podcast, you can check out our show notes at compassiot.substack.com. Alternatively, if you'd like to know more about the company that runs this podcast, Compass IoT, you can visit our website, which is compassiot.com.au. Until next time.